All right, welcome to this week's Rising Tide Foundation lecture, where we are going to engage in a fun set of discoveries today. I mean, there's a lot of ideas that I think many of us have been chewing on for a while, but I'm very, very happy to make a friend that I've recently, and an ally recently, out of Jan Wellman, who, as I've come to discover, has done some exceptional work on health from an angle which is, I think, probably the most healthy of all angles, appreciating the wave aspect of life, especially the electromagnetic component. He's written extensively on his work, on his research. And not only has he written about it from a research standpoint, but he's done something about it. So Jan is the founder and CEO of Frequencell Inc., Frequency Medical. What is it? Frequency Medical what?
Uh, I'm wondering where you're reading it from. Maybe the frequency medicine pioneer.
Pioneer is the word that I scribbled in Chicken Scratch, and I couldn't make out. I was like, "Puh."
I got it. No
So
problem.
Frequencell Inc. And he's helped make, or he's spearheaded making films, educational material, and he writes regularly on Coherent Reality Substack. That's something that people can find in the description box of this, under this video, when it's uploaded. Um, what I'm very impressed with is that this work that Jan has really brought to the surface, which has also gotten the support of people, thousands and thousands of practitioners who use his products, including Olympic athletes who have testified to its success. This is touching on something that I have sort of suspected to be true. And, anybody who's looked at the works of Luc Montagnier or Fritz Popp or Karl Ernst von Baer would not be surprised. But it's nice to see some empirical evidence that this is the future of health. So Jan has agreed to present some of his ideas in the form of a formal presentation, followed up by a Q&A. And like usual, I ask people to put your name in the description box, and I will call upon you in queue or raise your little digital hand. If you don't want to ask the question yourself, but rather I ask it, write out your question and make it short and concise, please. So other than that, Jan, thank you so much. The stage is yours.
Thank you, Matt. Am I coming through all right?
Oh, yes.
Okay, great. So first of all, thank you for inviting me. I'm a big admirer of your content for a long time now. Currently reading your book, which is blowing me away. So I find what you're doing with your articles and research is extremely important and relevant today. So I'm very happy to be here today. Just a little bit about myself before I jump into the presentation itself. What I like to say to everyone in the beginning is that I'm not a doctor, I'm not a medical doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm just a regular guy. Since very early on, I've always been an entrepreneur. I was always trading two paths. One as a startup entrepreneur, first starting in the 1990s in advertising and film production, and later on getting into documentary production, international documentaries, and at the same time developing technological startups since the end of 1990s. I was responsible, unfortunately, for some of the early companies that started creating mobile content, sticky stuff that distracts your attention. And in a two-year time frame, lost all of my hair from 1999 to 2002 with one of these crazy internet balloon companies. And long story short, I moved from, I was born in Finland, half German, and early on moved to United States, especially after I went through a disaster episode with some of my startups. I was focusing on film production, and I was in LA for 15 years, working for pretty much mainstream channels, both in the UK and Los Angeles, doing production, but also consulting startup companies. And I would say I have, by design, a very classical entrepreneurial character that is always looking for distractions, like modern day ADHD, always jumping from one project to another, not really centered, not really gravitating towards any type of purpose, just flying through materialistic time and space and trying to become something that has no clear definition. And I think I saw a lot of my partners and colleagues crash this way, and this is exactly what happened to me as well. And part of the main point of my presentation is really that you have to go through a kind of a catastrophic event in your life, or a meltdown. In my case, it was a biological and psychological meltdown in my early 40s, about 16, 17 years ago, in LA, where I had a fundamental burnout and checked into a hospital because I had massive inflammation in the body. I came from a jungle, from a shoot, and had a swelling under my armpit, and took a blood test, and the doctors told me that I have 3 days to live, supposedly because I had some type of extremely exotic, new and unidentified bacteria in my bloodstream. So this type of near-death experience, I was hallucinating on massive antibiotics for 3 days, came out of the tunnel okay, but shifted my attention completely from that. It was like a wake-up call for me. And I think today I'm very grateful that it happened, because I might have continued the same path and probably crashed in some other way very early in a slow burnout. So having a very fast and dramatic burnout was in a way saved me, because what I did the next 15 years was engage my time and resources and probably my only real talent, which is to do deep investigation and research into topics because of my background in documentaries. And I took that focus into myself and started experimenting what's actually going on with me, and realized very early on in the first 1 or 2 years that the doctors were the best possible doctors in Beverly Hills, Cedars-Sinai, etc. That they were giving me information that made no sense. They were putting me on drugs. They were putting me on more antibiotics. They were increasingly compromising my immune system. And then I went into alternative different experts, and kind of I was also a little bit upset on that side as well, because the alternative experts that came to me started giving me all kinds of herbs and natural substances, which is all great. But also in their case, their focus was to somehow address the symptoms and not look at the energetic foundation of what's going on in the human body and how it's connected to everything else. So I guess my expertise comes from this trial and error of searching for the truth about what's going on in my own body, and then finding some answers synchronistically, coming across people who changed my way of understanding the way we work and the way we heal. So my first thing that I did was actually leave LA, because I realized LA is not one of the healthiest environments in the world. I mean, it's a toxin bubble, basically, an EMF bubble, and you're living with people and competing with people in this interference of that kind of modern interference of people who are not living healthy lives. And you instantly get attached to it. It's a kind of an addictive lifestyle as well. So I got out of there at the nick of time and spent 2 years in Greece. Got lost. My GPS luckily broke, and I landed in the middle of the night in this very small village in southern Peloponnese, in an area called my God, let me see. Southern Peloponnese, Mani was the area. And it was a small village, maybe 300 people. Nobody really spoke English. I rented a place and started hiking and swimming and just eating Mediterranean nutrition, and really started from scratch understanding how to regenerate. So some of the people I read early on were Mercola and Hyman and the classic nutritional experts. I took a course in nutrition and really focused on thriving and getting my energy back. So with that said, I'm going to turn on the presentation, which I've used with in certain environments where I'm presenting the kind of journey, what I call from particles to waves, because ultimately what's happening in the understanding, if we want to understand frequency medicine and the possibilities of waves and how they're going to be used in the future and how they're being used today, we have to take this journey. And I have a theory on how that journey is structured. So let me just activate the share screen here. 1 second. Are we seeing the screen?
Yep.
It's working. Okay. So, human journey from particles to waves. What I like to start with usually is asking my audience, what is their evaluation of their own healthcare system in their own country, whether they're professionals, doctors, or nurses, or just regular people. And we can definitely start from the assumption that there's something wrong in the overall medical healthcare system. And there has been a suppressed know-how for, let's say, at least 120, 130 years in the frequency medicine spectrum, including homeopathy and the other alternative medical arts that were suppressed after the 1910 Flexner report. And the reason that happened is tied to a much bigger picture that you, Matt, are very, very closely investigating in your articles and books. But at the time when I started getting into this field, I had absolutely no idea. Some of the important thinkers, I think, today that also kind of brought me into this fundamental misunderstanding of our system is Matthias Desmet, who let me just shift this a little bit to the left, who came out with the first definition after the pandemic about mass formation and what's really going on there, and how to hypnotize masses with fear, isolation, and a singular solution, which in the pandemic case turned out to be vaccinations and isolation. So these were very profound experiences for me, because I realized that it is driving, and it has been driving our thinking for a very long time. And what he says here, let me just quote: a narrative that ignores the psychological, spiritual, and ethical dimensions of human beings, and thereby has a devastating effect at the level of human relationships. Something in this narrative causes man to become isolated from his fellow man and from nature. Something in it causes man to stop resonating with the world around him. Something in it turns human beings into atomized subjects. And it's precisely this atomized subject that, according to Hannah Arendt, is the elementary building block of the totalitarian state. So there is a big topic around this that is tied into the science, tied into what's happening in our healthcare system, tied into the forces that are shaping the WHO and other organizations that are trying to take control of sovereign governments and our own health. The journey between the mechanistic science, what I talk about in the particle science, and what I call a functional science relating to waves, is not an easy one. And it's not something that I believe most people can just activate and study logically, because it is such a deep context that you have to engage your entire being into understanding how deeply we are programmed into a mechanistic world, which is dogmatic and tropic. As you know extremely well, the entropic idea of the universe being central in our science. And in fact, the alternative idea is that the universe is basically syntropic. It's an intelligent, coherent universe that is self-organizing, and it's actually inclusive, and it's based on cooperation and evolution as a natural force. Another aspect that is very important in this journey is the realization of yourself. Who are you? Are you a particle or a wave, or are you both? These type of deep questions start bothering you once you get sufficiently upset in the particle world. So what I call knowing versus understanding is also important to remember that knowing happens in the forehead, understanding happens in the heart. Often a dramatic event is required to bridge that gap. At least this was the case in my story, because once you go through that ultimate experience, you have a door opening and you can step through it, and then you can engage your frontal brain in trying to understand what's really going, because of the extremely deep programming that we've been subjected to for over a century. So the mechanistic world, let's go through some of the examples here. For me, the journey started with my health, because my health crashed. If we consider the truth on top of the mountain, we can climb it from many directions. But in my case, it happened to be the realization that there's something wrong with the narrative about how we understand health. This being the primary example of how to treat the fish that's not feeling too well. Medicate it with drugs or clean the tank. And we're kind of medicating the fish when the tank is full of dirty water in our case. The other obvious example is that we have doctors that are focusing on single expertise areas. You have a doctor focusing only on the heart or lungs or liver, kidneys, etc. And they hardly ever talk to each other. So you're jumping from one doctor to another, at least I did in my case, and not making head or tail of what's actually going in you, but getting a lot of symptomatic drugs to treat these conditions as a standard. The wave reality of that is that we are one energetic being, and when we look at the examples here, they're quite astonishing. There's over 400 billion transactions per second in the human body just to maintain homeostasis. If you calculate that, it's actually, you need something faster than the speed of light, which would indicate that there's a kind of a quantum coherence going on in the human body and the organism for it to be able to function. You have ATP, 70 to 80 kilograms of cell fuel is generated and burned every day in a regular human body, which is an amazing amount. Regenerating 50 million cells per second. You have 1 million cancer cells are eliminated every day. So that's something that's very important to realize, that everyone has cancer. The trick is to have more energy, enough energy to deal with those cancer cells, because the system is constantly shifting and replacing and regenerating, like the skin. Once every month, your skin is completely regenerated. There is this interesting calculation that at our peak, we generate 5,000 times more wattage pound per pound than the sun. I can share that calculation with you. It's pretty crazy, but it's just, even if you take a fraction of these, you will realize that what's really going on is that the human body is a electromagnetic, energetic wonder mechanism, and we've kind of forgotten about it. And it's time to try and remember that our potential, because then we can take charge of our own destiny. Another particle dogma that modern science and the medical science very, very focused on is the DNA as the central code that defines us. And when you really dig into the DNA, you realize that it's not so central as we think. In fact, what's happening is that the DNA in the center of the nucleus is defined by the signals from the environment, from our thoughts, from our emotions, from what we eat, from what we experience, from the field interference, etc. So DNA is not a set code that defines us. We can define and grow and evolve our DNA if we set our mind to it. So it has been massively exaggerated because of the mechanistic understanding and perception of the human being. We are machines rather than evolving energetic beings with infinite potential. So we need to flip that whole idea around, that instead of this, there is a code that defines us. All these external signals are the ones that define the cell and the program inside the cell. And the breakdown of the different signals is very individual. And one of the powers and one of the real great things about frequency medicine is that I will show you later, is the ability to measure the different signals and their input and effect and influence of your well-being, and how to overcome, improve the weaknesses and work on the strengths in your own body. These signals that I was referring to here, 95% are unconscious and 5% are conscious. But we can work with that. If we are pointed to the things that we are not conscious about, we can start working with them. And that's, I think, one of the important things in frequency medicine, that it allows you to do that. I guess the central point here I'm making is that same DNA, different signal produces a completely different organism over time. And that's what we need to focus on. Same DNA here, different signal, mainly probably one input signal is amount of sugar being consumed. Here, a nutritional difference, living in the nature, living in the city, consumption of seed oils and sugary foods and living a natural life. It changes the body completely. Another dogma that's central is what I think is Maslow's pyramid, that we have to kind of fulfill the basic needs: physiological safety, belongingness, esteem, before we can self-actualize. Whereas in the Blackfoot Indian model, it's turned around. We are self-actualized when we are born, and we are already belonging because we're part of a tribe. And then the tribe is there to provide for our needs and safety. It's already there. We have a community, and our duty at the end of our life is actually to pass on everything that we've learned. Another central dogma in the particle science is evolution through random mutation, the Darwinistic proposition. And if you look at this owl here, and really feel it, not just analyze it, but really feel it, we can see and understand that there's much more going on. The organism is constantly shape-shifting with its environment and with the creatures we are interacting. So we are responsible for who we are becoming constantly. We're not set and defined beings. What I call real-time evolution, devolution via field interference. So if you take the human body and it has maybe 6 to 9 feet electromagnetic field around it, when we're close to someone else, we start, over time, we start resembling each other more and more, not just with our ideologies, but the way we live and the way we think, and even the way we look at. And as an example, I love this photographer. Have you ever seen and observed people with their pets just walk on the street and look at the people and their pets who they've been living with for several years, and you start seeing amazing things. We just don't pay attention to it, but this is what's happening. It's a classic example of field interference, and I can see this in couples when I do measurements with over 200 million measurements in 8 minutes. I can see how closely coordinated the biological functions of husbands and wives are when they've lived with each other for 10 to 20 years. The field interference is massive. Another particle reality is survival of the fittest. And the wave reality, actually the evolutionary reality, is that we have evolved through adaptation and cooperation. If you look at the human body, you have 100 trillion bacteria, 38 trillion cells, give or take, 10,000 different species, massive amounts of viruses. We haven't even started mapping all the fungi, and we're in the beginning stages of mapping our parasite species. And all of these are extremely important and essential parts of who we are. We are a community and not a single creature. That's important to understand. We are the microcosm, the same way the human body is a microcosm of Mother Earth. Mother Earth is a conscious living organism that is a similar kind of macroorganism composed of us and the rest of the world and organisms. So it's a different way of thinking, and the jump from the individual to this type of ideology is important. Particle reality also has given us the dogma of the idea that we somehow are landed on this earth, even if we're not religious, that we can own land and we can take control of things, and it's basically there for us. Whereas the wave reality looks at the different energy cycles, oxygen, water, nitrogen, phosphorus, carbon cycles, and realizes that everything is a cycle. I also like to take this example of modern obsession about self-identity and who am I, and I'm out there to find myself, and it's always about me in some form or another. Whereas the reality is that wave reality is that we can also look at ourselves completely objectively, not too attached to ourselves, and then start thinking of who do I actually want to be, who do I want to become, and that becomes possible with this type of thinking that gives you a sense of freedom and sense of empowerment that we can take control of our lives. Particle reality is also affecting alternative and medical science, and the focus on reductionism, predictability, reproducibility, and objectivity in science. And there is a very, very interesting sentence that I picked here from a biophoton scientist, Dr. Johann Boswinkel, that there are 144 sides to the truth. And instead of looking at one single absolute objective truth, the truth is like a diamond. And if you look at reality from the perspective of a commune or a tribe, the different perceptions coming together and interfering in a coherent setting, then that experience, that perception is beginning to be closer to the approximation of truth. Then a couple of more dogmatic examples that we are living in right now, which is very important when AI is beginning to be introduced, and CBDCs and robots and general intelligence that is beginning to take over everything, is that life can be digitized, that it can be broken down to zeros and ones. But there's something very interesting going on. If you look at the very simple mechanical movement of a pendulum, which is one of the simplest examples of building an arithmetic understanding on, is that there's a certain inbuilt deterministic unpredictability even in the movement of a pendulum. And it's this deterministic unpredictability that is kind of a secret source of information that encodes life. Let me give you an example. They did an experiment where artificial intelligence tried to teach toddlers, young children, language with movements and lip movements and words, etc. And it was almost impossible to do for the children to learn that, even if the examples were optimized. But when they felt this information coming from the mother, the information that was encoded in the unpredictable, deterministic unpredictability in relaying that information was actually was the part that the babies translated faster, and they were able to learn that language. So not anytime soon are we going to have robots here that are going to be able to truly teach us innate knowledge, because it comes from something much deeper that we haven't identified yet and completely understood yet, even in the esoteric sciences. That the wave interference that's happening between humans and the deterministic unpredictability that's encoded in that interaction is actually the information that's has the most profound effect on our learning ability, for example. Then there's an important dogma which relates to the 3 states of matter, which we learn by the time we're in high school or even earlier: solid, liquids, gas. And somehow we're completely forgetting 2 more states of matter that are, in fact, whereas the 3 first ones are entropic by nature, plasma and ether are syntropic. So there is some good, very, very suppressed knowledge and science. You know, the astrophysicists today, the top astrophysicists, have to sign NDAs with the NSA, etc., when they do deep research into what's happening in our cosmos and the universe, which is quite surprising. What we don't know about is that most people don't realize that there's ample evidence that 99% of the universe is plasma. And it's plasma as a highly charged electric matter that is self-organizing and acts in a way that could be deemed intelligent. And the same thing is about ether, even less understood, but it's also often called the zero-point field or morphic resonance or the medium of consciousness, Bose-Einstein condensate. But this part is responsible for storing all of the knowledge, everything that we experience, every thought, every experience, every deed, actuality, from beginning of time till end of time. And I personally, I believe that we all have sometimes these intuitive moments where we just grasp something. The information comes to us. And it's usually when we're letting go. It's usually when we are in a state of heart-centered state, a state where we're not analyzing. We're kind of letting go of thoughts and tuning into our environment, and then something clicks. I believe that type of information is our relationship, our interference with the zero-point field. Something to consider. It's a very interesting field to look into. Bottom line, when we jump and cross that gap from particle to wave reality and start thinking in new terms, then we start seeing also new formations, new patterns. The similarity of brain cells and galaxies, for example, that suddenly it starts to make sense. This is, I believe, 1 or 2 milliseconds after the egg cell is fertilized. There's a kind of a wave pattern that happens. It's like the beginning of life comes in a wave pattern. Now, I don't have the video with me right now, but it's quite astonishing how life actually begins with the inception of a wave. This is a picture I took in Corfu a year ago. And I just wanted to put it there because the sun in this plasma universe is considered like a neuron. So we can think of it as an intelligent, conscious source of energy. And our connection to the sun, and if you look at hunters and gatherers and tribal people, how they greeted the sun when they woke up and greeted the sun when it was setting, it has a deep significance philosophically, but also hormonally, because the setting sun, when we look into it, activates the melatonin hormone for sleep, and the rising sun activates the energy hormone cortisol. So it's a very good tradition to do especially if you're jet lagged like I am right now, to greet the rising sun and greet the setting sun and get your hormonal cycle back in action. This is what we've kind of missed in the last 100 years gradually, this connection to the natural truths. Something that people have probably been thinking that I'm going completely crazy is another observation from the wave aspect. I think this might actually is go out there on a early morning or late evening and look at gnats and how they're interacting. For me, it was a profound moment because it looks like it's completely random. But when you look at hours and hours of footage of gnats flying in formation, then you realize that there's a kind of a invisible field connecting to them. while they have individual trajectories, they're also combined with this field. It becomes obvious after hours and hours, and that's the moment when usually people start thinking that you've gone nuts. Here's another example. This is actually slowed down footage. So like some of them have invisible strings connected to each other. And once you start looking these type of patterns more and more, you take long walks in nature, you take long walks through the city streets, look at examples of interference between humans and pets and families, wives and husbands, look at interference of vegetation, of trees, and how everything is connected. We start taking gradual, subtle steps towards how we're actually being regulated, how everything is ultimately and infinitely connected, and how important it is to be aware increasingly of those connections for us to define ourselves and also have a chance of healing ourselves. This is another obvious example of a tomato and a somatic structure, which is generated with audio waves in a water bowl at a very specific frequency. It's kind of an intuitive example of how fields and waves are the primary regulatory creator and definer of structures, or the root of a plant and lightning, or the tree stump and human finger, seashell and the harmonic series of octaves, the human iris and the universe, or the Fibonacci shapes of plants and the universe. It goes on, and the ancients had this all figured out, all down and back to the times of Egypt. They had extremely delicate understanding of frequency and matter and resonance fields in how they define us and living organisms. So, next point. This was up to now, we've looked at the subtle steps in psychological steps in looking at the world from a kind of a different perspective, the wave perspective, seeing the patterns. And for me, this shift was very gradual. I would say that not just did I have to have a traumatic experience, but I've done a lot of Amazonian medicine weekends in the jungle and with ayahuasca and peyote, etc., that kind of got me unstuck from classical thinking. But for me, the important part was a practical one. How do I use this knowledge to start healing myself? So in my case, there was a massive, in 15 years ago, massive compromise of the immune system, low energy. So I was subjected to any kind of microbial attack easily. I was getting infections and getting all kinds of problems very easily. So one of the things that I looked at is, let's talk about energy or health not as a absolute. You're healthy or you're sick. Like we're going to a doctor, they said you're all good, you're healthy, or there's a problem, you're sick. Let's look at energy as a grayscale. And one of the elements that defines that is biochemistry. So foods are a very important part of it. In my case, I had to start with eliminating sugars and simple carbohydrates. I had to get into probiotic foods and fermented foods, whole foods instead of pasteurized foods. Looking at the different elements here, I'm not going to go through all of them, but personalized nutrition, we are very individualized in what is actually the optimal nutrition for us. And once we have that little bit more energy, we start feeling what's actually right for us. If we eat something, we should always feel 20, 30 minutes later, did this actually increase my energy or did it make me tired? Hydration, all of these different pretty axiomatic elements today, that antioxidants, natural antimicrobials, organic products, sleep, etc. So that is the biochemical aspect. And there's the mind, which we're very often in a health journey, we're ignoring this. But the mind has a much bigger impact on our energy level than biochemistry. So you have a driven versus status driven mindset, or aligned and centered versus chronically stressed, mindful and present versus distracted, etc., etc. You have a person who's adventure oriented or looking for safety and comfort. I personally believe, after doing over 1,500 measurements with very advanced diagnostics, is that comfort is one of the great killers of the 20th century, because we're always in the optimum environment. We're always safe in the right temperature. When we work out, we're not really exerting ourselves. So for the body to become stronger, it has to face intense resistance and intense dynamic movement. The problem with most modern lifestyle that it's lacking this dynamism of when we used to be integrated in nature. And then there's, of course, relationships. I'm doing measurement with couples who are codependent or people who are interdependent. Codependent being a very, very common feature of modern relationships. It's a massive drain on energy. Social isolation, social support, the trauma and how to release trauma. These are extremely important aspects. Another area that is completely ignored by modern medicine is what I call the field. Are we living in an environment that's rich in Schumann resonances, mostly happening in nature, 7.83 hertz, and the harmonic scale that is everywhere on the planet except in city and insulated environments? Or are we living in electrosmoke? Now, lately, 5G. These are massive stressors on our well-being. Or grounding and insulation. Most of us know about this. We're not doing grounding. Sunlight versus blue light, vital fields. We are working with vital fields or man-made radiation, etc. And then the environment, the physical environment where we live, nature or urban, clean air, pollution, clean soil, tarmac. These are all massive inputs. So we have to look at energy as a grayscale. And like I said, not a scientist, nor am I a medical expert, nor have I done any medical studies. I, from my naive perspective, started thinking of okay, what do we call this energy? And turns out there's the ancient cultures and Eastern cultures had their terminology for it. Prana, chi, ki, energeia in Greek. And we can today measure it with frequency equipment that I will show you in a moment. But I like to refer to it as epsilon, the Greek letter epsilon. And I was doing some work with metabolomic doctors in Greece who studied the ATP production with citric cycles with molecular blood scans. And they had access to 15,000 scans. What turned out is that most people today live in a sector which is about 40% of our potential in terms of ATP production. Is 95% are living in this 30 to 50% sector, and maybe 5% are in the 80 to 90. And that's very important also because it has defined societies increasingly becoming chronically ill. This was in 2013. They did a study of 35,000 people in 188 countries. So they have very statistically valid measurements. There was only 1 in 20 people without disease in the last 12 months. Chronic disease as a cause of death, 88%. So we are mostly dying from these lack of energy, and that's the primary cause. So looking at it from the field perspective, we need to look at our well-being from a cumulative and multifactorial standpoint. What brings the energy down in a cumulative manner, and what brings it up? And these are the typical factors in modern lifestyle that are responsible for it. But the story is always very individual, and frequency medicine and the machines today can help that journey simply because we can identify the different energy movers very quickly. So looking at frequencies, the field affects the cells affect the body affects the behavior affects the mind, rather than the other way around. The human electromagnetic spectrum is the collective sum of its frequencies, what in our profession we refer to as a vital field. This is the famous experiment from Dr. Luc Montagnier in 2009. I'm not going to go into detail. Suffice it proved without doubt that we can transfer information simply with frequencies from water to another sample of water in a way that retains even very delicate information like DNA. And in his case, he was able to reconstruct DNA simply with frequency information passing on from one water sample to another. That's a very interesting example. I recommend everyone reads through the details there. The science or technology that we use is a German-Swiss technology called Vital Field, and the clinical machines look like big, bulky equipment, but they're connected to a PC, and we do in 8 to 12 minutes, we do 200 million resonance measurements. There's about 116,000 objects that we measure several thousand times. And if you can think of a submarine sending a ping sound through the sea to find the next submarine, it's a similar technology, but scanning the entire human body. And this was the biggest challenge for the engineering team, was to come up with this methodology that was able to track as much of what's going on in the human body as possible. So this technology doesn't do comparative measurements. There's no objective standards. It looks at the human energetic system as a kind of a full, let's say a full symphony orchestra, and it's looking for areas where there's less resonance, there's more or less coherence, there's low energy, or there's blockades. And with that information, we can start understanding what's going on. So I'm going to give you some examples here of the type of readings we do with the clinical machines. The first information we get is a list item of different objects in the body where the body is using excessive energy with little success, or the body is using low energy in order to, in basically setting these areas on secondary priority, or the body is using high energy and getting the job done. So we focus on the overturn areas. And we also look at, if you look at the bars on the right side, we can see the distribution of energy in through 13 main systems. And if there's a big drop or if there's a blockade between them, and we can identify those areas, and then the computer pretty much automatically defines a program that opens those pathways. We can also see overall energy levels, the body, how it's going energetically in an up cycle or down cycle. We can see effect on the mucosa, the immune system. We can see adaptability and resilience. We can see inflammation and degenerative processes. We can identify specific toxins like environmental, daily exposure, endocrine disruptors, metals, pharmaceuticals. We can look at whether the filter systems are blocked or open. We look at each organ separately. We can spot how the lymph system is doing. We also look at the extracellular matrix, also known as the Pishinger area, which is between the cells, in terms of finding out how much toxin deposits are there. We look at, with everything that we're looking here comes from the 8 to 12 minute measurement. We can see cellular inflammation. We can see oxidative stress, nitrosative stress levels. We can see energy flow through what we define as the different axes of energy, from HPA to metabolism, etc. And when we look at all of that and combine it with the client's narrative, what are they eating? How are they moving? Where are they living? Are they happy? Are they stressed? What kind of relationship are they having? Is there trauma in the past? The medical history, etc. The more you understand of the individual and the more you correlate that with the data that we get in these measurements, the more individualized and accurate the therapeutic part is going to be. So based on those measurements and the individual narrative, the computer proposes a therapy structure and goes from very low hertz to very high gigahertz. We operate with magnetic plates, we operate with subtle currents, we operate with electromagnetic therapies that are very complex and simulate the fractal fields of nature a lot. So it's different from bioresonance, for example, which is more static. Our system and therapy-wise is much more dynamic and fractal to get the body moving again, to nudge the blockades. And we never tell our clients that this is going to be the key factor in healing you, because we don't believe that frequency medicine or any other drug or alternative method is going to be responsible for healing you. It is always the human body itself that has to reach this level of energy where it starts to regenerate, self-sufficiency of energy, opening the pathways, clearing the blockades, and then the miracle of the human body is going to be able to regenerate again. And that's the ideology we drive. Just a quick overview. We are working with Porsche Design to deliver the new generation wearable technology in 24 and 2025. This is actually a device that stands at the corner of a office or your room or your home, and you can download specific therapies there from thousands of different options. The same is here. This is a personal device that you have hanging around your neck, or you have it in your pocket or next to you when you're working, and it connects to a mobile phone, iOS, Android application, where you can also download specific therapies, sleep cycle or pain program, etc. This is all coming in the next year or two. And then we're coming out with a new generation of wearables. You can find the current wearables that we're selling in the US worldwide on vitalfield.com or frequencell.com that aren't this cool looking. They're more like silicone patches, but they work really well. But the cooperation with Porsche allows us to make these slightly more beautiful, in the sense that people actually like to wear them, because the patches that we're dealing with currently look like medical patches. And we want this to be not a medical patch. We want it to be a lifestyle apparatus and lifestyle philosophy that you can improve your life and regeneration with wearable aspects that are completely safe and non-invasive, non-chemical. The other aspect is we're developing wearable frequency clothing, etc., especially for our top athletes. We work with over 24 Olympic gold medal winners, etc., who are using this technology to regenerate also from injuries much faster and get their energy back. So the philosophy of waves combined with this technology allows us to do a lot of stuff. But when we have clients visiting the clinics and buying our products, we try to educate them to think in terms of taking control of their lives rather than expecting a gadget, whether it's frequency or drug. We don't want people to think that this is going to do the change. We want to drive the philosophy of you taking control of your life. The point of these machines is not to have machines. Rather than in pharmaceutical medicine, the point is to keep you in a kind of a disease spectrum so that they can continue selling. But we want to encourage people to take responsibility and get back into the light, get back into their sleep cycle, take control of their stress cycle with breathing techniques, proper hydration, proper nutrition, proper resistance training, exposure to elements, etc. And these are very individualized elements that we can give people advice on based on the diagnostics, including the chronic stress aspect, which is a massive effect. So long story short, the waves affect the body affects the behavior affects the perception and our beliefs and our thoughts, and it's a cycle that we want to help regenerate and get on a higher frequency of living, etc. Another aspect that I'm personally been interested is how mindset and perception itself can be considered as a frequency. And there's a extremely interesting author, I hope some of you have heard of him, David R. Hawking, who was a kinesiologist. He had 3 PhDs, and in 1970s he made his mark and create this evolution of consciousness map, where he, with kinesiological tests, he assigned energies to different mindsets. And you can see from, if you start from the bottom, shame, guilt, apathy, grief, fear. Fear is, for example, key aspect where that the control society is trying to keep us in this cycle, because it is always taking energy rather than giving energy. And it's very interesting that in his test, the first mindset that was actually energy positive is courage. Not even pride was on that level. But when we take that jump from pride to courage, something magical happens, and we are suddenly beginning to be energy self-sufficient. And when I look at the clients that I work with, and the real experts and luminaries in frequency medicine that I've worked with, this is a repeating pattern, is that the mindset is actually extremely central in the healing process. Even in terminal cases with cancer or chronic disease, if you manage to flip the mindset from the traditional narrative that you have, for example, 6 months to live, and instead you take that jump and flip your mindset, you find a purpose in your life, for example, then these miracle healings start taking place. And that's the fantastic thing, is that actually not a miracle, it is a scientific phenomenon based on the energy that is associated with different mindsets. So one of the things we're dealing with today is the social engineering narrative and WEF, etc. And the evolution of consciousness map for me was a kind of a positive story, because I realized that the narratives that control us and our societies are definitely fear-based. So the engineers themselves are not energy self-sufficient. That system is going to crumble on itself, because it's impossible to maintain for a long time. And another aspect that I've looked at in finalizing this presentation is I've seen this very strange phenomenon with the 5%. We've always come back to the 5%, 1 in 20 people. And when I did diagnostics of people coming from the after 6 months of the first pandemics, I noticed that 95% were weaker, and not just weaker, they had compromised immune system, they had compromised guts, they had massive oxidative stress, etc. And then this miraculous 5% were stronger, higher energy levels, more coherent body, everything was going well, and I couldn't understand it. And this is a very interesting thing that's going on, is that I believe that 5% is a kind of a special club that you can join if you set your mind to it, and which has to do with, first of all, heart and brain connection, and knowledge, behavior, and attitude, and the ability to know what drives your energy, etc. Because if you approach a catastrophic environment or fearful environment with high energy, with the right attitude, then you can turn the game around and actually become not just resistant, but even stronger from those events. And in conclusion, the jump from for me, this made kind of intuitive sense, because I could never realize or understand why did the Native American warriors go into these wars where they were almost certainly going to die. And I realized that they had innately understood this power of setting your mindset in and acting from a center of courage, and setting an example for their tribe. And it's a way of thinking that is wave-oriented thinking rather than particle-oriented thinking. And I think I'm going to end here. There's some quotes here at the end, but I want to leave some time for questions. And I think I've probably been rambling way too long for now. So I'll give the chair to you back, Matt.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and that was really quite the journey. And
I can't hear you.
You can't hear me? Can other people hear me?
Oh, no, now I can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. No, I was just saying that was quite the journey. And I really felt in many ways, I called you a maestro at the beginning. And you really were, in that sense, tuning the instruments. And I appreciated how you set the stage in terms of showcasing these two different paradigms to make it very visceral, for the space in the mind to move in and appreciate some of the details and particulars that you shifted gears on in the second half of the journey. So I really, really like that tuning, that philosophy of tuning the souls and the minds of ourselves and of the world as a very, very different way of thinking than the idea of just imposing, trying to force a logical construct of what you think is right onto others and onto yourself, which is often a particle-based way of neurotically distorting our potential. So really, really appreciated that.
Thank you.
I'm sure we're going to have some questions. I know we're going to have some questions. Stephen got in early on, who has a thought to share or a question to ask. Stephen.
Okay, thanks, Matt. Jan, thanks very much for a wonderful lecture. I love that, especially how you find the intersection of the spiritual with the scientific, and just absolutely a joy to listen to it. In terms of the science side of what you're doing and your research, I was wondering, have you encountered or incorporated any of the prior work of Antoine Priore or perhaps Royal Raymond Rife, if you're familiar with these early pioneers in the field of electromagnetic energy and health?
The original developer of vital field technology was Dr. Kiontke, who was a neutrino physicist in the 1970s and early 1980s. And I would say that he is the primary genius behind the technology. Started very early on. And what made it possible for him to take it to the next level was the introduction of personal computing in the late 80s. But I only had the honor of meeting him, let's say half a dozen times before he passed away a few years ago. And I know that he was very well informed by all of those luminaries. He looked at everything that was done from the late 19th century to the 1970s and took that and compiled it into the first version of the machines. But interestingly, he didn't just use as a scientific physics principle. He also took alternative manual practitioners who use their hands on clients, and he wanted to bridge that gap from energy healers to machine-based understanding. And I can share an article that I wrote about this development phase, because it's quite astonishing how one of the practitioners actually was able to translate what she was doing in a way that they, over long term, through trial and error, were able to turn it into an algorithm. And some of the clients that she was working with were subjected to these machine frequencies for the first time without knowing that there was machine, and their reaction was that she left the room, and their reaction was that, how is it possible that you're not in the room, but I can feel the same therapy? So this was like in the early 1990s, the breakthrough and a very significant milestone. So I don't have exact knowledge on all the scientists that he studied, and it's not my expertise area, but I'm sure most of them were a part of that study.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Makos was asking, and yeah, I share the question. Can you repeat the name of the neutrino physicist that you were inspired by? What was this gentleman's name?
Dr. Friedrich Kiontke, Kiontke. The
Okay.
reason you don't find very much about him is that he was inspired by physics and research and development. And the company they created was actually building these machines, but they wanted to keep it kind of hidden. So everything grew through word of mouth, but they didn't want to become public. He was very well aware of the threat, the dangers of the regulatory system in Europe and Germany at the time, and of course any type of indirect or even subtle claims on how they could be destroyed by it. So they operated pretty much in out of sight, developing these machines for a long time. And that's when I came across the machines for the first time and did my first measurement, I was started to immediately think in terms of a entrepreneur and wonder, how is it possible that these machines work so well but nobody knows about them? And it was because of that aspect that they simply kept everything hidden for a very long time for their own self-protection.
Maureen has a bunch of very interesting leads and things to look at as far as people who are curious to research your line of thinking, this whole current of research in greater detail. So I just perused through some of her suggestions. I recognized a few, but I think that this is a pretty good list. People should probably save that. Maureen, did you have a thought or a question or anything that you also wanted to toss out? Are you still there?
Yeah, hi, Matt.
Hey there.
Hi, everybody. I just thought I'd put this list out because whenever you go into these fields of, and sorry for any miscorrects here, I'm just typing a lot of, I'm not a great typist anyway. I hope it gives you enough. Some of the stuff's very hard to get. I just put it out here because every time you talk about biophysics or you talk about biophoton research and how that affects the body and what's been done, anybody with a science background usually says, oh, plasma, biophotons, BS, right? So I'm just putting out these, for those people with a scientific bent to get some backup to the research that's been done, which is awesome.
Awesome.
You've got a lot of these people are well known, some are less known. There's an awful lot that's apparently happening in China or has happened in China, which means we may not have, the layman may not have great access to that here. So if you're a layman and you want to put some meat on your argument, I mean, there are many more sources I can throw up, but it would take me about 5 years to type them up. This might be a great way to go. It might be of help to you. So that's why I'm putting it out there.
No, that's cool. Thank you. Thank you, Maureen.
You're welcome.
Can you share that? Where can I find that?
It's on the chat box. It's a big list under the name Maureen, and you could just copy paste that. All right, Hassan, go for it.
Thanks, Matt, and thank you. That was a fantastic presentation. Really appreciate it. So my question was on the applied side of things, in terms of how this knowledge is converted into sensors, algorithms, applied healthcare. Is it a large community? Are there many organizations and groups doing it? Are you more of sort of just forging out on your own? I'm just trying to get a sense of, it's obviously something that's emerging and it's different. But what else is happening? Thank you.
So just to clarify, I represent the commercial aspect of the wearables. My company, which I co-founded with Austrian partner, operates from Europe and US, selling the wearable solutions. But we are not directly involved in development. We give them ideas about what type of devices and approaches would be interesting for people based on our experience with end users. And we have extensive conversations with people who are using these patches every day on what they're looking for and what they're missing. So we give them feedback, but we are not engaged in development. This is a different type of black box that, and it's a team of coders, it's a team of physicists, and they've been working for a very long time. What's interesting now for the next phase is that, well, to partially answer your question, some of the critical feedback for them is, of course, the practitioners. So in the German-speaking language areas, there's a little less than 3,000 clinics, practitioners using the big clinical machines. And they're always exchanging information with the developers. So I would say that it is a community approach in developing this technology. They are very tightly knit. But there's a core group that does the practical work that I'm not associated with. I communicate with them and we communicate with them, but we are not involved in daily design and development aspect.
On
Thank
that
you.
note, on that note, I guess my question sort of touches on that a little bit. When you started originally putting forth a product that people could use, I noticed that like on the website, there's many different ailments, each one having particularly more useful frequencies that will help inflammation versus detoxification or some kidney element or something like that. So there's a wide spectrum of different specific ailments with particular tunings that are more useful to that one. Did you start with one particular ailment you were focusing on, and then you started tuning it with experience to figure out, well, okay, there's certain things that seem to benefit in other ways, and the products just branched out that way, or were there already multiple different things put on after? Like, how did that original origin and evolution process work?
Great question. Because of my marketing background, I worked with alternative health solutions for 8 to 10 years in Los Angeles, selling natural stuff and understanding what I think is the core group of audience, which is LOHAS, lifestyle of health and sustainability, which is a massive market of about 40 million Americans who spend about $380 billion in natural alternative products, etc. It's a massive market, and there's a lot of nonsense out there. So you have to kind of be very careful what's real and what's not. But my idea when we launched in 2020 was let's simplify everything. Because if you try to explain the science to someone, how these things work, let's say a field interference of cell communication, coherence, all that, it's immediately received as a kind of an esoteric message, not credible, etc. So I made a decision very early on to erase everything that had to do with pretty much everything that had to do with trying to explain the science behind it, and said, this is a non-chemical, non-invasive, and safe alternative. And if it doesn't work for you, return it and we give you money back, no questions asked. And to start with only one modality. It was April 2020, and the focus was on pain, chronic pain. So there's two kinds of, well, there's thousands of different root causalities of pain, and it's multifactorial and cumulative, but there's two types of pain in terms of their modality. One is systemic, which is shifting, arthritis, etc. It's always moving and it's affecting joints and it's affecting different areas, or it's localized pain. And we realized that there's different strategies for attaching these cells, if it's systemic or if it's localized. And we gave that information to people, and I released only this one product in April, and then we started getting feedback, and we had no idea what's going to happen, how this type of product would be received when they have no understanding of what actually drives this. And I would say that what we observed was a kind of a collective miracle, because we had in the beginning, we had less than 3.5% return rate. We had massive testimonials, and people started, there was a kind of a word of mouth effect that immediately took off. And there was kind of very little blowback in terms of what kind of bullshit is this, blah, blah, blah. I was expecting a massive blowback, but it didn't really happen. We did get into trouble. A company sued us for a trademark infringement. We were called WaveLife in the beginning, and the company called LifeWave took us to a trademark litigation, and so we lost 6 months there. But that was pretty much the only problem. And then when we had figured out how pain works and kind of took slow steps in serving, because I made it very clear in the beginning that customer service is very important. We don't want to grow too fast to not be able to give individualized feedback to people. When they have questions, we need to be able to service them, give them ideas, and give them material. And we are a small company with small funding, so we grew very slowly. But then when we realized that, okay, no pain cell is going well, it's under control, then we started introducing other modalities. And before we introduced them on the online market, they had gone through at least 1 year of testing. Next one was an anti-inflame cell. And all of these, at least 80% of the cells we introduced, also did cell studies with people who took electron microscope films of cell samples, and how, for example, wound healing would be accelerated, etc. Whether it was, and those doctors didn't know if they had a active or non-active cell, so whether they were using both. And there was a clear difference between the two systemically. So that gave us confidence to start in introducing more and more. And I think the strategy right now is that we're probably introducing too many, but there's a reason for it, because we want to get feedback from people how different things work, how certain things don't work, before we standardize them. And we always make it super clear that there's no risk. If it doesn't work for you, fine, just send it back and we cover you. So that's the process we've gone with. And I think that's important for any startup, not to grow too fast in that sense.
No, that helps. Thank you. Lab Manager has a question. Lab Manager, it is all yours.
Hi, sorry about that name. My name is Shimona. Lovely to meet you, Jan, and everyone. Thank you for this really enlightening presentation. My question was a little philosophical, taking it back to the foundations of the wave reality versus the particle reality. And I was wondering what do you believe that the wave and the particle realities it's one or the other? Are they mutually exclusive? Or do they coexist and actually affect and create one another? And if so, does the lack of awareness in the mass of the existence of the wave reality in how we do our science and how we actually conduct our lives, is the lack of awareness of its existence what's causing us to move and create a particle reality that's moving in such unhealthy directions, as you mentioned?
Thank you for that question. Of course, they are coexisting. Both exist at the same time. a little bit like Schrödinger's cat. But the wave aspect of our reality is broader. It's like one dimension extra to understand the aspects of our reality. And something fundamental shifted in my understanding of because I could never understand how is it possible that such an obvious area like the field interference and its use in modern medicine, why has it been ignored so fundamentally? Is that there is a concerted effort to keep the population less than healthy and less than in their optimum energy levels. And one reason I really look up to Matt as a very important content provider is his study into the origins of social engineering and how to keep the masses always in a kind of a gray area of their health. So when we talk about the Malthusian history of depopulation, etc., we don't need to look at the depopulation as an attempt to kill off population. For me, it's a massive effort to bring down the energy levels of the masses, because once your energy goes down, your cognition goes down, and you can keep this allows few people to control many. And I think this is the reason that we are stuck in the particle world. The particle world is absolutely valid. If I break a leg or a car drives over me, I want to go into a particle hospital. You know, they're going to take care of me and patch me up. They're not going to do it with frequencies. They're going to do it with biochemical and methods, which are brilliant. So modern medicine in that sense is absolutely a miracle science. But the problem is chronic disease management and how they perceive chronic disease, because this is an area where we need to, by definition, enter the wave reality, because we need to look at the human body as a multifactorial and a cumulative manifestation of energy. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it absolutely does. And even in the mental health space, like the energetic, everything is very focused on the symptomatic reliefs and the physical, but it's all based on the particle reality of the brain and not about the mind and the energy. So I think that's a very great way to look.
That's a great example. Depression and cognitive issues and how closely they are related to what's actually going on in the gut. And we can see that in our measurements constantly. A low bacterial diversity in the gut biome, for example. It is responsible, the GI tract is responsible for our immune system, for our endocrine system, and for our neurotransmitters. 95% of serotonin comes from these bacteria. So we eat all this sterilized food. We eat the sterilized food, and we seed oils, etc. And I think that massive depression pandemic is coming mostly from gut dysfunction, actually.
Thank you so much, John. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I remember Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a really remarkable speech describing the fad of Freudian, R.D. Lang, all of the psychoanalysis that really put an emphasis upon being a well-adjusted person in society. And he made the good point, like, we all want to be happy, but if our society is maladjusted, then trying to become well-adjusted to a sick society is only going to make you sick. Although you might be acceptable by the sick masses, that's not actually real psychological health. You should take pride in the fact that you are socially maladjusted to a sick society. That's actually a point of your morality that you should hold on to, because at that point you could be an amplifier for the good. And he had his own language for it, but it was very uplifting and it just showcased a whole paradigm of thinking that we take for granted inside of what people like him were tapping into when they were breaking from the mold and becoming these exceptional figures that don't seem to, you can't really qualify him as being like sort of statistically normal in the world that he lived in, but he was absolutely necessary. And you could say that from the standpoint of a healthy society of the future, that type of personality type should be normal. Like, why do we normalize mediocrity? Why don't we have a label of normalcy around exceptionalism? Like people who are just leaning into the unknown and being happy leaning into the unknown.
Absolutely.
Jerry has a question.
Yes, well, I had a question, but Mr. Wellman, you kind of answered it with your last answer, but I'll ask it anyway. Because in looking at the practical aspect of your work, it assumes a certain normal lifestyle, income level. And the big problem I see in our society is the poverty level. The people who have the worst nutrition, the worst hydration, the worst sleep, the worst stress is the poorer aspects of our society. And we really need a poverty reduction campaign for this to work. But in a way, you really answered the question when you showed at the first the difference between the particle and the wave. And the wave theory, if we have this holistic view of our health instead of just individual health, but our whole holistic view, we'd have that same holistic view of society. And we wouldn't, in the same way, we wouldn't tolerate, what they're doing with our health now. We wouldn't tolerate what they're doing creating poverty in the world. So you've kind of answered my question, but I just wondered if you saw poverty as part of this problem of health that we have to deal with.
Well, a great point that you're raising, because obviously if you're stuck in a city and you can't buy proper nutrition and you're eating drinking the tap water and doing all that, it's an impossible equation. And I think that we need to also redefine poverty a little bit, because I'm increasingly gravitating towards Costa Rica right now for personal reasons, because I'm beginning to be an older guy, and I'm not feeling very well right now. I'm in Vienna, where they want to be the 5G capital of Europe, and the 5G antennas are coming. And I've seen the tests what 5G does to cellular samples. So this is a massive problem, and it's much worse than 4G and 3G, and they're building these everywhere. So I'm gravitating back to nature, and what I find there in Costa Rica are people who have absolutely no money. They have no savings, but they have a little bit of land, and they have a Brahman, a very, very intelligent, aware cow that gives them milk and cheese, and they have fruit that lands directly on their porch from the trees, and mangoes and avocados, and they have a couple of chicken running around that give them eggs, and they are extremely happy, and they have absolutely no wealth. They just have this connection to the land, and I think that's wealth in a sense. So the problem is really our dependency on making a living in a city environment, which completely cuts us off from self-sustainability. And the system itself that we are increasingly experiencing is cutting us off increasingly from self-sustainability. Right now, we are looking at the elimination of independent agriculture in Europe. they're about to phase out meat production. And I could talk about meat for an hour, but when it's organic, free range, happy meat, this is an essential part of human nutrition, which cannot be replaced with synthetic variants. I know the statistics on pure veganism, especially when they eat these so-called plant foods, and it's a surefire method of very slowly undermining the energy production of the human body. So, long story short, the problem is we're cut off from nature, and we need to all think individually and in our communes and with our friends how to get back into the basics now more than ever, because where we're heading right now with the centralization of everything, of healthcare systems, of chemical food production, of genetically modified and patented seeds, etc., is a nightmare.
Hassan, did you have a follow-up question? Oh, and I see Marty there raised your hand. Yeah, Marty, you have a question too, right?
Sure.
Okay, so not yet, Marty. Hassan first,
Sure.
then Monty, then Marty.
Okay, Monty first or whoever. Wait.
I saw Monty's
right,
hand
great.
first, so sorry.
Oh, fine.
Yeah.
All right.
Nice. I'll actually extend on from Gerald's question when he was talking about poverty, because you've raised an issue and an opportunity that affects billions. And when coming out with a startup, looking at cost and price point and everything else, it's normal, right? You got to go to a much more focused market, like you were mentioning, Olympic athletes and maybe others that are in a particular demographic. I'm just wondering, given costs and prices, would you be ready to go out with something that would help billions, or at the very least, looking practically, someone came to you next year and said, hey, we've got a market of 10 million in terms of population, but they're in, sort of the bottom 20%, right, of earnings and income and whatever else. Is what you've built ready for that kind of market? And if not, what would you have to believe to make it ready? Thank you.
Well, I think it's important to clarify that frequency solutions, the kind that we represent, are not the final solution. They are pieces of the puzzle that we are missing in our environment and our lifestyle. But I do a lot of counseling with individuals where I do the diagnostic and I give them a 30, 40-minute therapy, and they're lying on these antennas, and I get to know them. I talk with them. I tell them every 5 minutes that I'm not a medical doctor, just to be absolutely sure. And I try to inspire them to take responsibility, that not to expect a solution from A, B, or C, but to start redefining their signals around them. So whether that's a relationship happening at home, giving them stress, or a work relationship or situation, or just a environment where they're not in alignment with themselves. Because I see this as the primary issue, is so many people are following this traditional modality, whether it's 9 to 5 or etc. Is I got to make a buck, and I gotta be safe, and I gotta get a cat, and I gotta get a house, and I gotta get a partner, and then have children. They go into this standard routine, and they're comparing themselves with everyone else. I think we need to address lifestyle on a very basic level and redefine the opportunity of healing ourselves in a natural environment. That's more important than giving, some type of cost-effective, massive frequency solution. But we do have a project with one partner in Africa where we have, 7, 8 stations in a local hospital, and there's folks coming over hiking over the desert and the savannas, sometimes 2 or 3 days, to get a treatment, and they love frequencies out there. They're already living in nature, and I think whatever is going to be helpful in propagating the knowledge and awareness of what this is doing, I would be enthused by. But giving an immediate solution to 10 million, I'm not sure how that would work yet.
That was very helpful. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, Monty.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I'm down in Baja, Mexico. Background, I'm an older fellow, but I've been through various traumas, beginning with the Vietnam War and exposures to all sorts of different toxins. Agent Orange in Iraq, depleted uranium, burn pits, anthrax injections, so forth. So I've kind of been around the block in trauma. And I'm having considerable success in Mexico. I'm somewhat of a hermit here, so not a lot of high tech, but eating a good diet, vitamins, minerals from my wife and so forth. But I'm working with a hands-on practitioner. And my question relates to my experience with him in working with the lymphatic system, the endocrine system, the chakras. He does, besides being a masseuse, he at the final end of it, he works with the chakra systems, which relates, I think, to both particles, chemistry, electromagnetic, and also different colors of different chakras. And he's very good at being able to diagnose and feel, in other words, it's one integral system insofar as your different endocrine lymph glands working together. And these, I can actually experience the opening of different systems as far as energy-wise through feeling, sensation, and also colors. Do you have any means by which, I know you work with various symptoms like inflammation and pain and so forth, but are you able to measure the balance of the energy system of these chakras, energy-wise or wave-wise, insofar as the flow of the energy through these systems and the balance of these systems? Because it is a holistic thing. I think they all work together. They all have specific functions insofar as your the biochemistry of your system and the balance of it, your consciousness, and so forth. Do you have a means by which you measure anything in that regard?
Well, I think we're basically doing exactly the same thing as a manual practitioner who is tuned into those spectra. I know practitioners using our machines who've been able to see the colors of the aura and different chakras since they were 5 or 6 years old. And it's just that the challenge is that we don't have too many of those individuals able to work manually with that type of talent, and training that kind of know-how is very intensive work. But I have massive respect for that art. It's a lost tradition, and very happy to hear that you have access to one of these people. When we talk about chakras, we don't use those words because we are the development and the philosophy of these machines have to do more with measurability and the ability to replicate a certain type of therapy. So it's kind of a mishmash between esoteric, let's say. I don't consider your practitioner esoteric, but most people would probably say it's kind of a esoteric approach, and the machine approach in that they are doing the same thing. When we, for example, identify lymph blockades, and we can see the individual lymph nodes that are most affected. We can see that the lymph system is stressed. We can activate the lymph system, and we can clear specific nodes. We can also see which type of toxins are causing that these type of blockades. We have a list of microorganisms, viruses, bacteria, fungi, that are either about to or are kind of causing more stress to the body with propagation. So they are kind of in the beginning stages of pathological propagation. And we can address them individually. So that's the good side of the machines, is that you don't need 30 years of training to be able to measure and address lymphatic issues, for example. But ultimately, we're doing the same thing. And some practitioners we have in our group actually do both. They do both, use both their hands, and they use the machines, and they verify what they feel with their hands with the antennas. So it's quite a interesting bridge between science and healing, esoteric healing.
Cool.
Yeah, there is the continuity between the chakras, what you might describe as an esoteric system, and the endocrine gland system or the lymphatic system. I mean, there's a continuity amongst them, isn't there, as far as the structure-wise?
Absolutely, there's a continuity. Everything we look at is based on connection. Connection with everything comes together in the energetic system. So all the diagnoses come from this basic assumption that everything is connected, and understanding the mentality and the mindset of the patient is therefore also extremely important. Because ultimately, you can do everything right. You can eat all the right things. You can spend a fortune on supplements and exercise and etc., and still wind up sick because you're worrying about something too much. You might be, there's actually a very interesting group of people that are so obsessed about their health that they turn out to be sick all the time. And it has to do with the mindset of putting your attention on something that is not necessarily contributing to your health. That's why you're absolutely right. Everything in this sense is connected.
Marty.
I hope.
Well, thank you. Not too much here, but first of all, I wanted to add my thanks to you as well, Jan. That was just outstanding. It was masterful. It was wonderful. And I'm, as you can see, of quite an old age. And I've been through myself a number of the experiences that you and Monty in particular have been through. And I had very similar experiences. I don't think I ever put them to the profound, productive, practical, not remotely, that you have done. But so much of what you said about what led you to this path, it rang true and resonated for me personally in my own life, and more than once and repeatedly. So again, from the depth of the heart, a deep felt thank you. First point. And the only other point, and I very much hope I can, follow you closely, and I know you're of enormous help already to me, and one hopes, I don't know what one can do in return, but one feels that one would love to. A related point, have you ever heard of, or any comments on, the work of the late George Van Tassel, who died in 1978, before narrowly completing his supposed Integratron machine, which still stands in theory in the Mojave Desert? I say in theory, because as soon as he died, federal government, unnamed people, confiscated his technology. And his obsession, and he got it from his own bizarre visions, which I don't necessarily ask anyone to share, but we all have our different inspirations, and one knows they come in different ways. But his philosophy sounded very similar to what you have been able to implement into the practice, the whole concept of cell regeneration. and how it works with high voltage electricity. I think his philosophy was much narrower and not remotely as holistic as you have achieved. But the one point I want to add to that is a point you have made, and Matt always makes, and I fully agree with both of you, is the central point about how the IQ and energy levels and health levels of the billions of people are coordinatedly and deliberately depressed. But there is a corollary to this. And the corollary is that Henry Kissinger has just died at the age of 100. And Rosalind Carter, the wife of the President of the United States, has just died at the age of 96. And her husband, Jimmy Carter, we are told is dying, has been dying for the last 5 years or more, at the age of 98. And look at the lifespans of Ronald Reagan, Gerald Ford, still living hardline deep state secretaries of state, Dick Cheney, who had to have another heart put in, who lived, I can't even remember if he's still supposed to be alive or not, but he certainly lived for at least another 10 to 15 years, if not 20 after that. This is not normal. This should not be possible statistically or in terms of our medical technology. It should not be possible. My late mother-in-law has just died 2 days short of her 100th birthday. But she was an outlier, obviously. Oh. And again, genes played a major role. Her mother lived, in turn, who I remember very well, another delightful lady, lived to the age of 97, 98 herself. My wife says it's the Ukrainians, it's the sauerkraut. Well, you know, I think sauerkraut helps. But the point, yes, the point exactly. I mean, the point is, have you any thoughts on the integratron or the possibility or related technology? Does it overlap with what you've achieved? And secondly, the feasibility that some of that technology has been realized for the elite out there, but not for the rest of us.
Well, thank you for that. I have to look into the integratron. It rings a bell, but I'm not sure if I'm remembering the right story. But it's always a good sign if FBI confiscates your machinery upon your
yes,
like they did. You know, in the case of Rife machine, the first of all, the Nazi Germany was after him, and then the FBI was after him.
Yes,
both of them came in and destroyed his lab twice. And there's actually an incredible book I recommend everyone to read called The New Science of Heaven, which looks at the history of plasma research, the confidential plasma research, and it turns out that the paperwork that the FBI took from Rife landed in the what is this classified division of the Navy Intelligence Department, which they then assigned this one guy to take a look into, and he used from I think 1960s to 1990s, 20-30 years. He researched these papers and then came out with the conclusion that this works basically, and it's an incredible research into the different suppressed narratives of an intelligent universe and the plasma reality. So yes, so there's no doubt that there are people who have access to incredible technologies that we can barely imagine, and that has to do most likely also plasma regulation, etc., and extremely advanced frequency devices. One reason that the frequency devices have been so well suppressed is that, of course, they're being used by the military for many purposes. Mind and behavior manipulation, which was already possible in the 1930s and 1940s with frequency machines, even from across a long distance, proven and done. I can't even imagine where it's at today. And weather manipulation, etc. Long list. These are all frequency-based technologies, essentially. So you can bet your life on it that there are some some individuals with access to this. And I know for sure, because I've worked with people in very deep advanced levels of nutrition and ATP production and citric cycles, that we can essentially DH or any organism today. This is pretty accessible already. It's just costly and it's not widely propagated, so you have to know where to go and what to do. But life extension is extremely possible and happening, and probably been going on for at least half a century already.
Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, it's such a power, this paradigm of thinking about pretty much everything. And with power, you could do great good and great harm. Sometimes, in the case of a Kissinger or one of those creatures, a bit of both, good for their body, harm for humanity. But it's a very interesting quality. And yeah, I mean, it's so obvious when you look, especially considering what you just showed in a simple way during the first half of your presentation, the obvious connection between the types of harmonics and geometries that we find in galaxies, that we find in the organization of life, of shells, of animals, even the migration paths of birds. Like, how do birds know at this time? We've got these beautiful flocks of geese flying south from Canada down south. I don't even know where they go. How do they know where to stop? How do they know that it's time to leave? How do they know to like bind together with the other 12,000 geese that are going to be like migrating with them? How do they know to form these geometries and move together as a one? They don't think it through. They didn't go to school, but it's there. And then how do they know when to come back? It's a fascinating paradigm, and it would make science a lot more fun to learn in school if this was like.
Absolutely. This is what I was thinking about just yesterday, is that why wasn't I introduced to any of this in school? We would have saved so much time.
Yeah,
and get kids enthused with learning again, because what they're being taught is all particles, it's going down the wrong rabbit hole, basically.
Absolutely. Do you have time for one last question?
Of course.
All right. I know it's late on your end, so I wasn't sure. Okay, Kevin.
Hi, thanks for this presentation. Just a short question. In your actually in your customer base, did you ever had some of them who were afflicted with some sickness like multiple sclerosis, or any neurodegenerative disease like those?
Yeah, I mean, MS and neurodegenerative conditions, there's same story, multiple cumulative, multifactorial. You have lots of metals in your body, whether you're eating a lot of tuna or fish, or getting it from water, or getting it from processed foods. Metals are everywhere. So if you have a lot of metals in your circulation, and then you combine that with constant EMF exposure, talking to the phone close to the head, you do that 10-15 years, you're starting to open blood-brain barrier openings, which lead the metals and toxins into brain where they don't belong. So that's one aspect of slowly creeping neurocognitive issues. The other is, for example, Alzheimer's. Some people are beginning to call it diabetes 3, because it's also a nutritional. It's not just it's a cumulative exposure to sugars causing plaques in the neuronal structure. So all of these come together, and most of our well, I'm not saying most, but a lot of people are beginning to experience these in very early stages now. Like there are people in their 30s beginning to experience Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. So it's every year it's creeping up to younger and younger people. So it's a massive problem. But the root causalities are the same as in all other chronic diseases.
Okay, so as Kevin was talking, I noticed two people wrote saying, "Is there time for one last question?" So that's two one last questions after this last question. Are you okay with that?
Yeah.
All right. Karen, are you still there?
Hi, yeah, I'm here.
Oh,
Can you hear me? Yeah,
Oh.
okay. Yeah, it's, I'm hearing about all these wealthy elitists living these ultra long lives, Queen of England and her mother and all the people that were named earlier. And I'm just wondering, is there a frequency that could remove psychopathy? Because it seems to me that a lot of these people are living long, physically long lives, but what is happening to them emotionally and mentally that they have to inflict themselves on the rest of us? So I guess my question is there a frequency that could remove psychopathy?
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. No, this is the most important question. How do we address psychopathy, and where does it come from? And yeah, I'm not I'm not a medical doctor. I'm also not a psychologist, but when in my filmmaking career, when I was doing documentaries, I made one documentary about what was it called? The condition that it's a scale of egocentricity. I have to check the name of it.
Narcissism?
But narcissistic personality disorder, NPD. Thank you, Matt. Your dictionary. So the story was basically I went up from, you can do a test, a written Q&A test, and the scale goes from 1 to 8. Regular people are 1 to 2. Entrepreneurs, high achievers, ADHD type people, like where I would place myself, are in the 3 to 4. So I'm like a gray scale. When I grew up in my earlier life, the way I lived, the way I perceived other people, my whole perception of the universe, I was honestly speaking slightly psychopathic. And so what I'm saying is that there's not a on-off switch for psychopathy. It's a grayscale. So the documentary was about people then became 5 and 6, and you would have the extreme CEOs who basically everything revolved around themselves. And then when you hit 7 to 8, you had psychopathic killers, you had arsonists, etc. And I interviewed some of them in jail. And it was a very interesting experience because I took the test myself and realized I'm also in a scale. So what made me and what helped me reduce my own grayscale psychopathy was these type of experiences where first of all, where I started off was a traumatic experience of almost losing your life and then reevaluating it. So we need a knock on our head. That's for sure. But if we grow up in an environment, on a family which is already psychopathic, and that mentality is protected, and you're in a protected environment, then it repeats itself and it goes on. And the power of psychopathy is that you don't have empathy, so that removes any kind of restraints on controlling other people, and that makes it over hundreds and maybe thousands, maybe tens of thousands of years. The psychopaths rise to the top in terms of material acquisition and power.
Yes.
So how to break that? How to break that axiom is a key question, and we don't have a frequency for it yet. But I think it is, I believe that the rise of psychopathy and the rise of material accumulation, the wealth distribution and everything related to it is a waveform in itself. We've seen how societies collapse in the past and how they're preceded with the same signs that we are looking at today in intense, massive wealth distribution inequality. The kind of sense of loss of meaning and purpose, the implosion of societies, and the kind of rise of the insane leaders, etc. Everything is happening right now, and this in itself is a kind of a cycle, and we're hitting the peak of it, and I believe it has to come down. Like everything else goes up, it has to come down, and we start a new phase. And there's actually a very interesting other book that I recommend, which is the I have to non-zero sum. I don't remember the name now, but the point is, it's a biologist who studied the principle of evolution, and what he sees in the universe and in societies, whether it's human communes or microbial communes, is that they go through these cycles of intense pathologies leading to collapse, and then the minority that comes out of there starts a new cycle, which is on a slightly higher frequency, i.e. level of consciousness. So you have the example of the caterpillar when it starts to cocoon. What's happening actually, interestingly, is that 95% inside the cocoon, you have the system goes into a completely chaotic state. So all the cells basically become mush, or a chaotic soup. But 5% start to reorganize. They become the brain, the wings, the body, and the etc. And that's how the butterfly is born, from the 5% who reorganize. And that's, I think, what's going to happen in human society is complete collapse and a reorganization of the minority, and hopefully a journey to a higher consciousness and a better planet. I like to think that way, at least.
Interesting. I'm just curious, you said, do you think the current wave of psychopathy has reached its peak? And what makes you think that?
Well, because I'm not saying it's right now at the peak, but I think this is pure intuition. What I'm observing and seeing like an accelerating chaos and disorder, fear, disinformation. Everything is accumulating, and we're kind of feeling that things are getting out of hand. They're accelerating at a level where, it can't go on like this. And if you don't think about it, just feel what's going on around us and feel the people around you, there has to be a point where it climaxes. And I think we're close to it.
I agree.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
All right, we have one last question. John, got it. John, it's yours.
Thank you, Jan, for a very stimulating presentation and discussion. I've thought for many decades about this question of particles versus waves, and I've moved through different transitions, and most recently I found,
John, good.
much to my surprise, that German science in the middle of the 19th century was extending the Newtonian model to include electricity, to the point where everything was going to be redefined in terms of electricity. The most significant person in this tradition was Wilhelm Edward Weber. And so this is another form of particle that we're talking about. These electric particles is interacting through action. They're the principle of action at a distance. And this was systematically dismantled by the empiricists led by the German Hermann Helmholtz and the British William Thomson, later Lord Kelvin. And they promoted what's called the field. And the field is ultimately based on the vortex theory of atoms. So you have this amorphous ether with these atoms that don't really do anything. They're not real atoms in the sense that we understand them. But the way that plasma physics and the electric universe and other people who've worked generally in this tradition have come up with is that, in fact, at whatever level, if we accept that the universe is fractal, whatever level, you actually have this massive web. You may, at a specific frequency, look and see particles, but if you look at other frequencies, you realize that these things are weaved together into this vast tapestry. You gave two side-by-side images of the brain and the and galaxies. The Webb telescope is giving us more. So I think it's I'm not sure if it's a comment or a question. The particles exist, but they are weaved into something far more complex than the atoms of Democritus or Leucippus.
If I understand correctly, you're talking about the tendency of modern science and the research Matt has done into Thomas Huxley's X Club and the heritage of their successful attempt to redefine science into an entropic version of everything. Because you're right, the medical literature before 19th century and early 20th century was phenomenal. And it all disappeared after the Second World War. I don't have too much knowledge of the names you mentioned here, but the narrative is the same. We had Warburg, for example, in 1923, who defined the metabolic theory of cancer, which still, after 100 years, it's the most valid look at the nature of cancer and also how to treat it. And it's very precise. But we had, in the beginning of the 21st century, we employed thousands of supercomputers to try and figure out the genetic root causality of cancer, which was a complete waste of time because cancer is not mostly genetic. 99.99% the DNA mutations are caused by cancer, not the other way around. So everything we're looking at in medical literature, in scientific literature, is pointing towards this atomic structure where nothing is connected. There's a lack of harmony in the universe, and we are basically on a path of self-extinction. That's what we need to turn around, and that's what inspires me about the technology, is that it's very hard to explain something to people when they've been programmed. We have been programmed for 100 years to understand a atomic universe, when actually it's a wave-based energetic universe and reality. But if you put them in a machine that sees they can feel it, and they can see the connections of how their mind and mindsets and their nutrition and the movement. And if they change certain things, they come back in a week and they see how these things have changed. And bing, It's like a door opener for them to realize that, hey, I am at the end of the day in charge of myself. I can make the changes in the signals around me, the environment. I can change these things and they will change me. I am in charge. And that is a very positive message. I'm not sure if I answered your question, but I think
No,
we're talking.
I think I could summarize it in one sentence. The atoms are not disconnected from the rest of the universe.
Right.
Whether you call the atom the human being, a specific atom in our body, a specific organism that happens to be in our body, a specific culture, whatever.
Right. They're not disparate. They're part of a massive universal symphony orchestra. They're part of a design. They're part of a grand music orchestra.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Yeah, that's a beautiful resonant way to, I think, round out today's gestalt, today's idea that shaped a lot of smaller ideas within a very, very beautiful composition. So I thank you very, very much, Jan, for being so generous with your time, your knowledge, and sharing, which I have total faith will continue to resonate beyond in nonlinear ways that we can't even imagine into the long distant future. So we should all think of ourselves increasingly as both antennas as well as resonators are in our own lives, right? And work hard to situate our identity in that new sort of framework, because I guarantee you the type of creative powers that you're going to be able to tap into, the more you choose that type of identity, and the effects of those actions that flow from that identity are going to be much, much better, and you'll be happier with that outcome than holding on to the type of oligarchical, material-based identities that we've been told is what is normal as consumers floating around as little particles in a controlled machine that we're not supposed to understand or influence. Much, much healthier. So thank you so much, Jan, and thank you everybody for showing up. We'll see you all next week with a class that I think might have a very similar but different theme as what we just heard today. So take care, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Ciao, ciao.
Cheers, everyone.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.